Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 16th of February 2020. I sometimes get these reality checks. They just hit me like a slap on the face sometimes because I don't live within the general society as such. I live in the country, not an expensive palace, believe you me. Most folk might say it's a dump even, but the fact is I'm pretty quiet and I don't have television, I don't watch TV, I have the internet. But because I don't have TV, I don't get and folk don't realise this because most folk do watch television, most of your programming, almost 100% of your programming and your updates and what you think, what you believe, how we treat people and so on, and even how to dress, how to behave, and what to say, and the terminology you use now, because they're constantly changing it, all comes from television, both in fiction and non-fiction. Most of it comes through fiction, actually. And most TV is fiction, even all your reality shows. They're not real. People don't behave normally in real life as they do in the reality. Or you'd run away from them if it did. But I can remember back in the 90s, I think, when they started doing the first kind of reality shows, which were like contests. And back in the 90s, for a little while, I did have TV, and rabbit ears, of course. And I saw these shows where they'd get people in to do all crazy kind of things and make spectacles of themselves. They'd eat worms and all that nonsense, or lie in coffins of worms, all that ridiculous stuff. And I knew that it was really a program designed to take off and to expand into a preordained direction, basically. That's how everything's done, you see. It's step by step and incremental, but big plans are laid down long in advance, years in advance of where they take you. And I had no idea just how far the present day reality shows have gone. And so in this surrealistic world, and it really is a surrealistic world if you're living in electronic reality, if you think you're in reality, because most folk are. They've either got the phones to their skull all the time, or they're watching something from television or so on. But all this stuff, and they can chat with each other about all the things that they're watching on television, because these things are designed to get as many viewers as possible by using psychologists and behaviorists to get the people to watch and get addicted to it. And of course, sex is the big pool, naturally. And they have these. So in the middle of all this happening and the crisis across the world, as folk get this coronavirus and how it's played up to the hilt. Initially, it was played down unless you were one of the general newspapers that are part of the big club. And of course, anyone who wasn't part of the big club was getting hammered for just mentioning facts and even their observations, in fact. But now the big papers, of course, themselves are saying all the scary stuff, and it's okay for them to say it. I noticed, too, they even had little okays for different sites and so on, or articles, or even YouTube things like okayed by the WHO, or a line through it, meaning it's taboo. This is how far things have gone. You see, with general terrorism in Britain, and all countries are part of this big system of terrorist control. And terrorism control also comes into crisis control, for those who don't get it, like the COBRA system in Britain, for instance. And they have a whole panel of so-called experts to decide what the public will be told or won't be told, and because they want you to behave in a certain way. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to pandemics, etc. Just like the movies, of course, they've given you so many pandemic-type movies, getting you used to this idea for the last 25, 30 years. And a whole stack in the last 10 years, in fact. Right down to the welding of the doors and high-rises at the bottoms of the big main doors so that they can't get out, which they're actually doing in China now, apparently. So you're living in this amazing, again, electronic reality, as I say, most folk are into. And so I looked up the newspapers today just to get an update on the coronavirus and see what's happening. And some of the papers had nothing at all. Other ones had little one-liners that were old, a few days old. And I looked at the Daily Mail, and as I say, I'm so far out of it. I'm like a person looking from the outside to the in. I'm looking into this goldfish bowl of the world. The first, at the very top of the Daily Mail, and a lot of other papers too, I found out, was the death of a woman who hosted a TV show, a reality TV show, and how she'd apparently been charged, or was going to be charged, or was got the charge. Who cares about the gossip? The fact is, she'd hit her boyfriend with a lamp, supposedly, and she lost her job or something, or was laid off temporarily. But anyway, I guess the inference was that maybe she died anyway. For some reason or another, she died. But this is someone on TV, a TV show that's a kind of dating thing, which is all about sex, naturally. And the pictures there of her and the different, even contestants and so on, who all look like, to me, who doesn't watch TV, like cartoon characters. Really. Even the guys, they look like they had their faces. I don't know, can you manicure faces? I wonder, I just don't know anymore. But the hair was up, and these big tufts on the top, just like they used to see in the cartoons from the 1950s and 60s. I'm not kidding you, that's how they used to look. And that's how the people look today. Who's designing all this stuff for them to copy? Because it's copied. Nothing comes from the grassroots in style and fashion or anything, you know. Anyway, that was the top story, and I thought, wait a minute here, there's folk on cruise ships where folk are dying and they can't get on, all that kind of stuff going on. There's this massive crisis in China going on. There's so many amazing things to talk, but the main story is this woman, the host, who died on a reality TV show. This is the reality, and it said that millions of folk tuned in every time the show was on. Now, I'm sure most folk out there maybe I probably know what I'm talking about because they have TV and so on. But do you realize how fake a reality is? If you believe in all that stuff, how fake it is. It's incredibly fake as opposed to our everyday lives. Reality today is made up of fiction for most people, more so than any time in history. And not just fiction, but programmable. As a programmable fiction that you're given, predictive programming, as I've said so many times, where you're getting readied for the next stage of whatever it happens to be, right down to even the pandemics to come and how you'll behave, etc. But the Cobra system that deals supposedly with terrorism and what you'll be told and how to manage society, including panic in society, you know, or how to prevent panic. The idea is the same with pandemics. The big teams that manage pandemics keep the public ignorant, just like the movies, by the way, and tell them as little as possible. They say they're there to treat them like children and don't even tell them any hard, truthful facts. That's really how it's government. They see themselves as being the kind of placebo, or the tranquilizer, you might even say, for the general public. That's what they're in this kind of situation. And folk don't realize it, how really thin this veneer of civilization is. And it does take a form of coordination of different segments of society and different aspects of society and emotions and so on, and the various dynamics and psychodynamics too, are all going on within societies to keep it kind of functioning without it breaking down or folk going crazy and destroying each other, you know. And it's fine, you can get along. I said this years and years ago. Everyone can get along, including all the different massive segments of societies within cities. They're all broken up. I don't care what anybody says. I've been through cities. I know there's different quadrants and so on. Everyone can get along as long as money's flowing. And then get basic foodstuffs and money left over to spend for entertainment and so on. Everyone can get along in society as long as that exists. But when it starts to break down, which eventually it might, I'm not saying it will, we don't know how bad this whole pandemic is going to be. We hear all the scary stories from the top now, as I say, from the top. And from all the supposed country or national experts now in Britain and elsewhere. But you'll see society changing if what they say comes to pass. We don't know yet. There's still this almost deniability amongst the public, mainly those who are still in the know, who watch this kind of stuff going on. They've heard them cry wolf so many times from the WHO. And we know they want big world exercises, and this is also an exercise in so many departments of governance, as they call it, to take care of everything and trying to keep it all together as we go through it. So time will tell what's true and what's fictional and so on, and how bad things really are going to be. But as I say, supposedly the top specialist in Britain, or one of them, has come out and said that this could really, they're not going to stop it. In fact, what I've seen, even in the last couple of days, is all the signs that they're going to try to stop it. They've made decisions at the top, obviously, where they're even letting a lot of planes come back in from not so much China, perhaps, or parts of China, yeah, but also countries around China where many Chinese live. They go back and forth to China all the time, I mean by the week. So it looks to me as though they've come to the conclusion at the top that they can't really even slow it down much, or they're not going to slow it down much. It's too big for them. We'll have to wait and see. There's a whole bunch of planes grounded at Heathrow Airport, supposedly, because some people got sick. We've had all this amazing confusing disclosures to the public, all conflicting stories about even the type of disease it is, this coronavirus. In other words, what's it really like? And initially, of course, you were being told to be calm and don't worry and all that. It's just like a cold or a flu, and you get over it. Some people only get a runny nose, they said. I mean, when we look into China, what they're doing there, and they go up and down the streets with these massive trucks, spraying this goodness knows what into the air at a good height too, and through offices and all the rest of it. This isn't just a little runny nose thing. So don't you get fed up getting treated like a child? And you're told just to wash your hands. Well, if you go out in public to do whatever you have to do, even to get food or whatever, where do you see places to wash your hands? Look, everything you do, you have to open doors and all the rest of it and close. Everybody else does the same stuff. Shopping cart, same thing. Eh? Do you see any bowls of water out there, disinfectant? No. And if you cough, just cough up your sleeve. Just say, this is the best to tell us to do in the 21st century. Think about it. We're being treated like children, and not very bright children either. So it's not a good scenario. What makes it more scary, I think, for most people who have seen all these movies, they've been churning these movies out about pandemics and virus and plagues and so on for years, showing you what they do, including the quarantine methods, including the welding of the doors in the high-rises, which they're now doing in China. You've all been trained what to expect, in a sense, you see. And of course, what you've been told and trained to do is to obey authorities in such situations. Because in the movies, it's not good for those who disobey the authorities in such situations. So government really, and plus too, I think on top of all of this, you've had so many people over the years from big institutions, even having in real open dialogues on television and so on with the so-called experts. Too many people on the planet. There's just too many people. I remember the one from Australia a few years ago. And again, they make them stars, these professors. The star-making machinery tells you this is a special professor. He's more important than other professors. And they're going to be the voice box, basically, for pushing the agenda for depopulation. And he said, it'd really be a decent thing if the people around retirement age would just, die and leave the jobs for younger people. You see? And we hear this stuff and we say, what on earth is this? But these are the people who belong to big think tanks and institutions that have world meetings on. These are the characters too who end up going to different dialoguing conferences within the World Economic Forum, this big, again, massive institution that you don't vote for, where all the richest folk go to decide how you're going to live in the future, according to the way they want you to live or exist. So that doesn't help it either, does it? When so many have been chomping at the bit for a long time, or the Georgia Guidestones, and if the world was just reduced to so many million people, from the billions to the millions, then it'd be a better place, they say. Doesn't help, does it? It really doesn't help. And I'm sure many folk are so puzzled. Many are puzzled, especially professionals who are not in the higher echelon of understanding what's going on, because you're not allowed into it. There's different tiers of knowledge and tiers of confidence, you might say. But there's many professionals, as I say, who just can't fathom if something so awful has been unleashed upon the public, inadvertently or whatever. It doesn't make any difference how it got there, they say. And at this time, concentrate on the problem, not the cause or who's to blame. But the fact is, even the basic national quarantine laws are being tossed out the window. If you want to save the nation, you don't bring people who are possibly infected, and you don't know yet, see? You don't know yet, into countries straight from the most infected area, and give them little notes to sign. You promise to go home and quarantine yourself. Oh, sure, yeah, and away they go. Or not even being quarantined into a population that is completely clean from it or free from it. You don't let them in. You don't do that kind of thing. That's not quarantine. That's not even common sense. Especially when they keep telling you, and they kept telling you at the time, we don't understand this virus. It's new. A new type. They didn't even know what the period inside you, the prodromal period, would be from getting infected to showing the symptoms. Because you understand, it's not mathematics here. There's so many different human variations within the human type. That some folk might show symptoms in a few days, other folk might take weeks. That's standard, you see. So try to put it down to mathematical, like you're all robots exactly the same, cloned. It doesn't work. So they came out with statements initially, as you all know. It could take up to 2 weeks, you see. And they even had, I think, quarantine initially for 8 days or something like that. And now they found out it might take much longer, even 20 days or longer before you show signs. So to add to it all, we have this incredible, it's really panaceas for the public. We're testing them with kits. And the other day, of course, it was announced there that after all this time, the kits are only correct half the time. Well, so is the law of averages if you toss a coin. And then when you dig into the reasons for it being only accurate half, it's because what they're claiming now, because rather than take the responsibility, they're no use, these particular kits, is, well, you see that the staff today's, the modern staff in medicine can't really follow the instructions for it, because it's not just a matter of a simple thing. You got 2 or 3 things to add to it and stir it together, just like a normal laboratory, you see. And they're trying to say that the staff today don't have the brains to work it out. Well, that inspires confidence, doesn't it? So, I'm not telling people to panic. I'm just saying, use your common sense, because you're going to have to use your common sense here. You really are. And as I say, it looks to me that with what's happening today, with today's news and so on, they're really just allowing it to happen. It would seem to be, really. There's one place in Britain where they brought the possible infected people. They didn't know yet, you see, to wait and see. But they brought them in, and they put them up in a hotel, I believe. It was a hotel, kind of quarantine type hotel. That's self-quarantine. They signed forms, the government says, we made them sign a form promising not to leave there for 14 days. Well, they went back a few days later, they're all gone. And the staff in the hotel said, well, there was no one left to guard them. Does that really look like something that's terrified the guy, when they don't even put guards there in some of them? You really think so? Something stinks somewhere. A lot of things stink, actually. And so I'm not surprised at the rumour mill. The rumour mill must be buzzing like crazy. with such apparent incompetence or negligence. And you can take your pick as to what you want to believe. It doesn't make any sense at all. And then again, other people, as I say, have been passed as cleared and all that, and then had to develop the symptoms later. So we've got so many variables here that really are not. When you don't understand something, and if something might even take a month before it shows in some people, then you'd have to hold all the people for at least a month. You understand that? That would be common sense. And if you keep bringing people in every day from flights all over around the Far Eastern area and quarantining people, you'd have to have for each plane load, you'd have to have a separate quarantine quarters for them, because they can't mix with the ones who came in 2 or 3 days before, because they're on a different timeline for release than you are then, you see. In other words, the recent people, if one person was infected, then all the rest of them who are ready to leave would all get infected too if they were in the same place. So I don't really think they're going to try to go the whole way with this and quarantine anything properly. And they seem pretty resigned with their statements, as I say, today and yesterday, that this is going to go around the world. And right into maybe next year and the year after, in fact. So we'll wait and see what happens. We don't even know what the bulk of the populace who's infected the worst with it happens to be, because years ago I gave talks on the release documentation from Porton Downs in Britain, where they had literally admitted to it, and a few other countries admitted to having the same stuff. Every country's probably involved in it. They have ethnic-specific viruses, which they work on, which makes us feel much safer, doesn't it? The whole point with quiet wars, like that old silent weapons for quiet wars, is to trying to confuse anybody from pointing the finger to, you might suspect who might have let it out, but then you may get led to believe by the perpetrators to where the fingers are pointing, and it could be a setup too. That's the whole point of quiet weaponry, silent weapons for quiet wars. This is the world we live in. And as I say, the world we live in is not a happy place. It's happy through all the masses of fiction we're dosed with and the Disney-esque stuff and so on, and the fantasy. But in reality, the world really it can be a horror show at times like this. And if you haven't seen World Wars, then you won't know what a horror show is. The history of the world, when it comes to dominance run by dominant psychopaths for different nations, is truly a horror show. And there's no doubt about it. Countries definitely have no problem recruiting psychopaths to work in laboratories to create incredible, terrible diseases to kill people. There's no doubt about it. They sign these treaties to pretend they're not doing, but they just say, well, we're not really making diseases to kill people. We're just altering them now for health reasons to see if it ever developed itself into this or that strain, we'd have something ready to fight it. So we make this strain, you see. That's what they do. That's what they say. And they get paid all big bucks for this, and they smile on television when they're asked and so on. And they get awards for things being so bright and intelligent. But really, these people are psychopaths. As I've said before, psychopaths don't have normal worry. They don't have normal worry. In fact, they can't handle frustration and anxiety. They have an ability, an incredible ability, to get people fighting around their vicinity with each other. And they'll sit back and watch you. And that's how they work off their frustration and anxiety, is through other people's. They create conflicts for other people to be involved in, and then you just sit back and watch it. I'm not kidding, that's really how it works. A lot of them go into politics. A lot of them work their way up the ladder, or really knife their way up the ladder, you might say, behind folks' backs to get to their top positions. They're very persuasive and very manipulative. Calmly so, though. It's their calmness that makes people believe them. They're so calm. And they eventually get what they want. But they get into these different positions that all governments have, where it's nuclear weaponry. They're the guys that are recruited on purpose to turn the keys. I did talks years ago. It's from the old series on Polaris submarines in Britain. And the Americans were stationed in Britain, as you know, during the whole Cold War. in the nuclear submarine bases, and they did documentaries where they went through the subs and they asked, how do you recruit these guys? Most folk, you'd think, would just crumble at the end and it wouldn't turn the key, but it meant literally not just imminent destruction for the enemy that you're going to send them off to, but your own destruction as well. It seemed ridiculous, and most folk might crumble and crumple at that decision, you see. But the psychopaths, they were pretty well geared towards it. They would obey their masters. Psychopaths only obey their paymaster, and they look after themselves. But something superior to them, up above them, with more power, they respect. Anything beneath them, they mock and laugh at, But above them, they had the respect. And they said these guys were selected for their psychopathic tendencies. I think it was the same psychopathic test that they used in high offence prisoners. Tests. So that's where government recruits, and they put them in the silos and the mainland, and they put them in the subs too. But then the ones who excel in universities in certain areas are selected too. You don't realise that in universities, even school, for the last 40 years, 50 years, even from the junior school or primary school, they call it in Britain, onwards, you're being carefully studied, and there's reports about your behaviour and personality constantly getting put into. Now, long ago, it was through different little paper tests they gave you. Now it's all on computer. They know exactly who you are, and they know even who to pick once you get into high school and groom for their positions in these particular types of positions that I'm talking about now. But as I say, that's the real world. Now, a lot of folk, again, can't even handle that, because really it gives the impression we're on a very delicate balance of destruction or survival when you look at it. But that's how the world is really structured at the moment. It really is. It's never really been a very safe place in any era, but today, with high sciences at work, it isn't either. And to add to the confusion, as I say, you have all these tests that they've been chomping at the bit to have for the sort of lockdown tests for quarantine that we're seeing right now, ready to go into action, and police will get authorities, military will get the authority, and all that kind of stuff. They've been chomping at the bit because they've never had in the Western world a real activation of these powers to see what they can do. And that's how they find out their weak spots for control, is by having these tests. So, as I've said before, this could be a great opportunity for those at the top to do lots of exercises that they've been chomping at the bit to do for a long, long time. Including, in fact, I'm sure everyone's caught on to it, that keeping people on board those ships, those cruisers, for a good period of time. And they've been studying them, the different groups, especially the different groups that are involved there. They had people from India on the crew, and one of the ships off Japan, I think it was. They had a completely mixed group of passengers, Britain, the US, different countries, and probably Chinese too, and various other nationalities. They've had a good time to study what's happening, who's prone to come down with it, and so on. And what they'll do too is give certain of these antivirus drugs out to different groups, and then study if it works, because it might not work all the same in every different group, you see. So the big experiments are taking place at the same time by those at the top, and the data has come in. And as I say, it's interesting to see that they're now pretty well resigned, I think, to the fact that it's going to go across the planet. And it may be, you understand, there's definitely authorities at the very, very top. Don't think for a minute that in the Western world especially, they're all working independently of each other. There is a form of global governance going on here from the top as to how we'll behave with it or deal with this thing as it goes, as it continues and grows, which is definitely going to do, they say. Meanwhile, as I say, this is happening at the same time as I say, opened up the newspapers, and the top story is what I said it was. Some reality show host dies. And reality shows are all fiction, folks. Don't get involved in it. This is all fiction, and it's all added. You always add the sex into it because it's guaranteed to grab the primitive part of the brain and addict people in this day and age, because that's really what it's meant to do, to lock you into a system, and also to help destroy the system in which you grew up in and make it worse than it was before. And that's part of it too. There's big agendas at work right now, folks. We've all heard about and read about, it's not hearing about, it's actually reading about the sterilization processes that certain big organizations, which I won't mention right now, because they do have the ability to ban you now off social media. Sterilization, put it that way, through different means, or even through all the different phthalates, etc., that are out there, and plastics, and the xenoestrogens, and the phytoestrogens, etc., etc. And people are top heavy with this stuff now from so many different sources that it's definitely affecting the sperm count in males, we know that. And women too are being heavily affected by it as well. So there's many things in the make right now to do with bringing down populations across the world. And the ones at the top and the big groups at the top are incredibly vocal about the necessity for doing so. So do you really blame the people when this kind of thing breaks out and they're questioning whether this is deliberate or not? Can you really blame them? Come on here. Come on. I can remember years ago giving a talk on a radio station on someone I knew in Canada who worked with educational authorities, who managed to get away many times to go over and work with for the United Nations and other countries, but mainly to do with bringing down the population in places in the Far East. And I casually, she was casually telling me about it. I says, well, listen, I says, who gave you the authority to get involved in bringing down the populations of other people, or anybody for that matter? And she literally looked at me as though, and this is what happens if you're not in the club. It's like they suddenly realize that you're not one of them. And she says, well, somebody has to do it, she says. And well, these are the same people. There's lots of them out there working for the big authorities. And that's how they talk about what they believe they have to do. We won't do it ourselves, So somebody has to do it.